IPv4.global, from Hilco Streambank. Backed by Hilco Global, IPv4.global has completed thousands of transfers. Our online marketplace serves address blocks and ASNs of all sizes and regions. Transparent, experienced, reliable. IPv4.global.
You don't call your mum via a chain of other people's phones. So why would your Australian network be any different? One Internet Exchange Service makes single-point national connectivity in the Australian market as simple as IAA. Carrier-neutral, high-performance, unmetered peering from IAA. Because your users deserve it.
In Asia, the IP address management is managed by an organization called APNIC. Then, APNIC appointed IDNIC, APG, to run the IP address management process, especially in Indonesia.
Team Cymru delivers no-cost threat monitoring to internet service providers and hosting providers who partner with us. Nimbus Threat Monitor gives you near real-time threat detection, illuminating the compromised assets on your network and those of your clients by correlating your network flows with our world-class IP reputation data. Saving and improving lives is Team Cymru's mission, and making the internet a safer place is integral to that mission. Take advantage of our peer signal threat detection today.
right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for some, good evening for some others. Welcome to the final day of APRICOT. And really, without much further ado, I'm going to start this session record. And off we go. So I'd like to welcome you to the final day of APRICOT and a DDoS Realities panel discussion that our host, Barry Green, has put together. Over to you, Barry.
Well, thank you very much. So let's see here. What I got to do is I got to pin myself. So we're on there. So thanks everybody for coming. We're recording this session and we're doing a little, some things that are different. I got a bunch of my panelists, which you'll hear, and we'll have a conversation going on today. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Get the white screen right there. Okay. So let me go ahead, and what we're going to do is quick introduction. So we're going to do things a little bit different because we always like to try to not get stuck in one way of communicating and empowering our audience in the APRICOT community. So we always try something different. So this one is going to be a hybrid panel because we always have a challenge of trying to get like talent who aspires to be at APRICOT, but just can't, you know, do the 16-hour flights to whatever location in Asia Pacific and things like that. So for this one, we're trying something out. What we did is we got several of our top DDoS specialists in different parts of the industry. They agreed to go through 4 different questions, and we pre-recorded them. All right, and then we're going to watch one of the questions, and then we're going to have a conversation, a Q&A session. So if you have questions about DDoS or things like that, you know, this is a good time to ask, because the collective experience is decades of collective experience of all the different panels. We got some of those prestigious DDoS specialists in the world who are eager to help others do their best to secure their networks. And if people like this format, we'll try it again. We'll do some more stuff with it. The idea around this is create a tool. So one of the purposes we're looking for a tool like a format like this is to give an engineer who's sitting in a telco who's trying to explain to that person's bosses that we really need to pay attention to DDoS resiliency and our network architecture. And hey, let's listen to these people. And pull up the videos of these interviews and say, look, this is what they're going through. This is their experience with it. We need to pay attention to wake up. So, so this is kind of like one of the intents of see if this is a format that can help out with the community. So the people we have who jumped on to interview, and some of them are here with us tonight. We have Richard Clayton, Roland Dobbins, Krista Heakley, Alexander Lehman, Damian Mencher, and Ivan Rotisky, right? All of them are speaking on their personal behalf, right? So it's not really speaking on behalf of the companies. And going through with the interviews is really good because they're expressing their personal experience, which is what you want as an engineer talking to an engineer or architect talking to architect. You're not looking for a corporate response. You're looking for like, what's this person's experience as a engineer and a peer sharing with you. So I hope you gain value as you listen to each of the questions in the videos. So again, the format was to go through and do a pre-recorded session with it. What we're going to be doing now is moving to the first question. I'll walk through the questions we asked, and then we'll move to the first question. We'll listen to that. And then when we get to the end, we'll introduce the panelists who are with us, and we'll go through and have a Q&A session and have things with that. Now, notice on these slides, I put the link out to these slides. The videos we already posted up on YouTube. So right after this, you can watch the other questions. So this is the first question that we're going to be listening to, which we ask people what the worst DDoS attack you've seen and how do they define worse, right? Then the next question we ask is, okay, what do you do to defend against these worse attacks? And the reason why we said have a definition of worse attacks is you talk to different people in different parts of the industry, worse will be different from others, right? You know, what's worse to me as a telco is different from a cloud provider, which is different from a bank, right? What is worse? So it's always important to define those things. And then we asked a magic wand question: if you could change anything, what would you change, right? And what are the sort of things you would do that could really make a difference on the internet to reduce our DDoS risk profile out there? And then talking to different, because I talked to all the panelists and said what type of questions we should ask. And Krista brought this one up, which was indicative, because I think a lot of organizations right now, because of the crisis in the world, are going through this. All of a sudden there's a crisis and people waking up and says, oh, wait a minute, I can actually make some changes in the organization to make the organization safer. And this is kind of like where we listen to each individual, what they would think. So I think Krista had a little bit of a foresight of the, I hope not, the crisis coming. The links to the videos are here. So if anybody downloads the presentation, they'll be able to see, pull down the videos with it. And these videos, we're going to iterate. We're going to, play around with some videographical skills and add little captions and things like that. Things that can help people get the points across and understand and use that to communicate to, their peers and bosses inside the organization. So without, let's go ahead and stop the share on this. And then I'm going to switch over to the first video and we'll try this out. And make sure we optimize for audio. There we go.
So I define worst as most impactful. And most impactful, I kind of define as not just, did this degrade services for some end user, but, how much financial, technical, or human resources did you have to put into investigating or mitigating or actioning this incident? So that's kind of how I define worst. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
So with what, I've seen, so this isn't necessarily things that I've worked on, but just, observed, because I have had a keen interest in DDoS for almost 2 decades now. Was back in 2007 watching, some of the what were called and probably were nation state attacks on Estonia, and how that disrupted, their Estonia, given that they were more technical and advanced than a lot of other countries at the time. And now as we sit here and talk, we're kind of seeing a repeat of that in Ukraine. And I mean, I found those what I would determine the worst, because that obviously impacted their society and their end users quite a bit. And it was a lot of financial, human, and technical resources involved in, mitigating that and eventually investigating it. And it was also worse, I would say, on a personal level, just watching, this type of attack, DDoS attacks, which in most cases are not super sophisticated, impact a country and being used almost in, well, I guess not an act of war, but in a nation state conflict. So that was one of the worst I've seen. The worst I've personally experienced was not with my current organization, but a past organization. It wasn't, it was about 5 to 6 years ago. It was approximately only 100 gigabit per second attack. So not overwhelmingly huge for an operator. We did have proper DDoS mitigation. But this particular attacker, they were taunting us on our formal social media, which actually took a couple hours to determine. But we were seeing intermittent on and off DDoS attacks, very specifically and almost surgically kind of targeting our pain points on our network. And given, that went on for that incident went on for approximately 72 hours. And this individual was on Twitter, announcing stop, start, what they were going to do next. They were changing from UDP reflection attacks to SYN floods to, so a lot of manual mitigation was involved. And again, it was 72 hours. Personally, I slept very little during that time, as did others on my team at the time. again, it wasn't a super sophisticated attack. It was, we never did, we did work with law enforcement. Unfortunately, we never did catch that individual, but it was never very clear what their motivation was either. So it was, I would kind of put that in the category of worse, because it did intermittently impact our end users, but it also incurred a lot of technical and human resources mitigating the attack, and of course financial resources when we finally found our end solution there.
Yeah, so let me start by saying it's not always about the size of the attack. but rather the impact it has on the target or their customers / users, whatever they want to call them. Any attack that has sustained impact is a concern, but the most concerning are the attacks. To me, the most concerning are the ones that come from a dedicated adversary. So, think of this common industry term, APT, stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. So in the DOS context, that's similar to kids. They'll try a scattershot approach. They'll try to see what works. But if they're very persistent and maybe state sponsored, that could be sustained for months at a time rather than giving up quickly. Kids generally give up quickly. So, in terms of the worst I've seen, in one case, an APT deployed fairly novel attack methods against different parts of our infrastructure nearly every day for about 6 months. And so the attacks weren't always long, they weren't always large, they rarely had any impact, but the daily occurrence of them increased our concern that maybe they could find a weakness somewhere. And it also made it challenging to retain focus on any discovered weaknesses because the next day we'd be looking into some new thing and it's just hard to remember to follow up on anything we'd found the previous day. In the end, for us, there was no user visible harm. We did learn a huge amount from this. We deployed some architectural changes that'll make us stronger to deal with future attacks and make those less likely to succeed.
I'm an academic at the University of Cambridge, and I don't get DDoS attacked. Well, at least I did once because somebody found out afterwards that I'd been attacked and I was on an attack list. But because I'm on a really fast university network, I never actually noticed. So I basically measure attacks which are going to other people, and I see the packets going to my sensors, and then they're reflected off those sensors and they go to the actual victim. So we track the victims and so forth. But because there are very large numbers of reflectors scattered around the internet, not all that many packets go past my sensors. So I couldn't really say what the biggest one I've ever seen is, because it just depends whether or not they use my sensors a lot or a little in any particular attack.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's actually two aspects to it, in my opinion. There's the worst can be something that you never seen before, and that is actually for me. It's probably was I think it was back in the beginning of the 2018. It's when the memcache amplification became a thing. So, and people discovered that, and we actually seen the attacks all of a sudden that well over 200 gigabits per second, and that was so. We've seen that about the same time as other sort of larger DDoS providers have seen, and it's kind of that was interesting because before that, memcache. So at the time, memcache wasn't a known thing. So it's just so yeah, this like service, which is effectively supposed to do your sort of internal application caching and never supposed to be on the internet, all of a sudden has this massive amplification factor and starts getting easily and widely abused. And so that's one scenario. But what's probably worse is actually from the customer perspective is targeted attacks, because I mean, yeah, these big large attacks are especially for some new undiscovered vector or newly discovered vector. Is they kind of interesting. They also fairly mitigatable. You can mitigate them fairly easily. The targeted attacks, however, it's the whole different story. So that's where the crew actually, well, I mean, DDoS is not a DDoS is not a rocket science. It's very simple, but all you need to do is really understand the basics of the network planning and how the network protocol protocols work. And then if you do a bit of a homework, then you can actually plan the attack. You can find the victim. Most of the stuff we see is obviously extortion related, but you can find the victim and find what's vulnerable and actually work out a viable strategy on how to keep that victim impacted, because you can someone who's done the homework, they actually can take multiple angles, multiple styles of attack, and they do understand if simple volumetric stuff to choke victims connection doesn't work, hey, how about those authoritative name servers which sitting over there, and let's just knock those, and then when the domains TTL expire, then yeah, all of a sudden all sorts of outages happened.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's I guess those sort of pre-planned attacks are scary, I would say, from the victim perspective. They're scary because they can it's basically ongoing mitigations, and then the attackers just change their techniques and they have stuff repaired. But on the other hand, so the victim was likely chosen because they had these exposures. So if an organization can have a look at their exposures, and it's basic stuff. It's resiliency of your kind of main internet pipeline. Don't have all your eggs in one basket, right? So it's don't have your sort of general internet connection and your critical services on the same pipe. Don't have your DNS on some sort of a resilient infrastructure and all of that stuff. So if you kind of understand your external exposures and done your homework, it's not easy to mount a targeted attack.
I will start with last question, and it's really easy one because it's the easiest one. The worst attack is attacks that you can't really mitigate in a sufficiently short time frame that it does not affect your business in considerable ways. So attacks that you could not mitigate, it's the worst. And for the second question, actually, this is a really hard one because I have two candidates, and I'm really like on the edge discerning which one is the worst, but I will probably start with the one that is common for most organization sizes, from really small business to the enterprise. And it would be the case where all your metrics are green and you don't notice anything wrong or special, yet all your business metrics are down to the ground. Your business basically is not functioning. And this is usually the case when you have a blind spot in your metrics. You forgot about some backup channel, or you're missing some very important, for example, TCP/IP semantic metrics. And attack vector is basically going on in your blind spot, and you could not mitigate what you don't see, since what you don't see you can't understand. That's why thing we don't know what's going on. And the second thing is usual for large corporations with hundreds of teams working on thousands of network services, using tens of thousands of network protocols and things like that. and all your metrics are red, and you really see the attack going in your enterprise network, and it's definitely code red. But when you try to consider, so we've been attacked, we've been hit by Richter 9 earthquake. Now what? You usually have no idea what applications are in your network, how they scale by their critical level. What is critical for your business, what is less critical, what is nice to have, and what protocols they are using. TCP, UDP, is there any authenticity management implemented in these protocols? Do these applications, can these applications degrade gracefully or not? You just have no answers.
Right.
And it's because your organization is so huge and so federated. But it's not an excuse, because you have to have a good account of what applications are your business is and how critical they are. And for every single team that's working on this application, you have to have someone responsible for developing recovery plan. Otherwise, it's a lost cause right from the beginning. You could not defend what you have no idea what it consists of.
Which, SQL Slammer was not, which happened in 2003, January 2003. It wasn't an intentional DDoS attack, but it was a very severe internet-wide traffic excursion that was caused by an extremely prolific worm. And it had a huge impact on network operators, both ISPs and ASPs and so forth, as well as enterprise networks. And that was a really seminal event. It was a real wake-up call to a lot of folks in the operational community that we really had to make sure that we were engineering based on packet dynamics and throughput and understanding the capacity of our routers and our switches and so forth and how they are going to behave under sustained high traffic loads. And so I think that was a really seminal event that a lot of folks learned a lot from. I was very fortunate. The network that I was working on, we had designed it and implemented it with principles so that we were not actually negatively affected by Slammer. And we also had very good visibility so that we were actually able to understand what was taking place. And then because we had the visibility into what was taking place, we knew what additional steps to take in order to make sure that we weren't affected ultimately Slammer, and we didn't make any missteps, which you can often make if you don't have visibility. So that was a seminal event, and a lot of people don't even remember Slammer. That was a huge deal. In terms of intentional DDoS attacks, I think that when Mirai made its debut in 2016, that was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. Now, we had seen IoT botnets for many years prior to that. We've seen DDoS for hire services for many years prior to that, and weaponizing things like reflection amplification attacks, which even makes the most unskilled miscreant able to put a lot of packets and a lot of bits on target. But the wave of DDoS attacks that were initiated when Mirai made its debut with a lot of high-profile targets ended up congesting peering links, and again, some of the same types of symptomologies that we saw with SQL Slammer and with other large-scale DDoS attacks writ large. So that one was certainly a big one as well. And then one bonus I'll give you very quickly is we've always had, ever since we've had DDoS attacks, we've had the more casual attackers who just let it rip, and there have been the smaller cadre of the more skilled attackers who do extensive pre-attack reconnaissance, and they identify the different elements in the service delivery chain to go after in terms of network infrastructure, API API endpoints, things like that. And I fought some interesting duels a few times with some very skilled attackers who had done their pre-attack reconnaissance and who would actually, I could tell by the way that they were reacting as we would employ different defensive measures, that they had actually gamed out a few steps in advance as to what they thought we would do in order to be able to defend. And thankfully, I'm batting 1,000, knock on wood, and have been able to defend against those attacks. But we're really living in an age now of adaptive DDoS attacks, where this is becoming a lot more common. And so, dealing with some of these very old attackers who react very well and have a plan can be very time-consuming. Sometimes it can take multiple hours to really be able to pin them in a corner and deal with all of the tricks that they have in their bag.
So that was our first question. And so just a reminder for everybody who is coming on board new, what we're doing right now is we did one video with a question. There's a lot of meaty material. And at one time I was thinking about trying to edit it down, and there's so much knowledge being shared, I don't want to edit any of it out. So what we did is it's in the slides, you can see it, and also drop it into the chat here so everybody can see it here. So it'll be multiple locations, and also be posted on the APRICOT site for this session. So you have the videos posted here. So on your own, you can go and listen to question 2 and 3 and 4, and there's a ton of materials out there. And there's one addition that I'm probably going to do is pull a couple of them out where they got kind of like an extra video. So what we're going to do right now is we got Damien and Ivan and Krista and Roland, right, who are in overlapping time zones that fit over here. So we have them live going on right here. So they got their sessions turned off here. I'm going to unpin me, make sure my pin's off. So that way the video will move around. We're different people. And so I'm going to start just do a quick go around on, let's take the topical things. Maybe a quick 1-2 minute. We'll start with Damien. Given the anxiety going on in the world right now, what's a couple of things that's top of mind for your DDoS resistance? I'm just kind of do give a quick introduction of yourself and kind of like, what's your top concern with this, with the Russian-Ukrainian activity going on?
Okay, that's a big one. So quick intro, I'm Damien from Google. We're obviously tracking all of the events going on here. There's a lot to worry about. I think for me, the most interesting thing about this is, it's that last question we had of how do you make sure you never let a good incident go to waste? Right now, everybody is using DOS attacks to target everything. We have seen attack infrastructure used to target Ukrainian websites. We've also seen attack infrastructure used to target Russian websites. The amusing thing is it's the same infrastructure targeting both sides, right? And we've also been a target of this for months or years. And everybody is a target. It's just common infrastructure that everybody is using. Now, it's been hard to convince ISPs and whoever to take action, right? We could shut this down if transit providers would take action. In fact, this particular infrastructure, we've been asking action to be taken on for months, and they've ignored us. But now that this is being used as part of a war, now we can go to law enforcement or whoever and say, hey, were you aware that your infrastructure was being used to target this political adversary or whatever? And suddenly there's a lot more interest. So this is a really nice example of never letting a good incident go to waste.
So what's interesting on Damien is, as everybody listens to the other sessions, one of the common themes that came up was exactly what you talked about there, that collective action, the collaboration. I'll put the plug in since we're at APRICOT. Events like this where we get to meet each other and work with each other. And then when somebody asks, like if Damien calls you up and says, hey, can you take action and take down these reflectors? Those things go a long way. They make a big impact. So Ivan, you're up. Quick introduction and what's your big top of the worries today?
Hello. So I'm Ivan Rutsky. I'm a security manager at Vocus New Zealand. So we kind of the far end of the world from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, with Ukraine and from our perspective, I guess it's more of the any sort of collateral damage that for any of the attacks, larger attacks, and so we don't really expect to see anything targeted. But also, and what's going on there is pretty horrible. I've got relatives in Ukraine currently, either sitting completely isolated or hiding in bomb shelters, and it's it's really, really bad.
These things affect people in unfortunate ways.
Yes.
Well, we'll hope for the best on that, and Rowan.
Sure. In terms of what we're seeing with the current imbroglio that's going on, we're seeing a lot of attacks. We've seen, I think, certainly more than 2,000 over the last couple of weeks, targeting very specific infrastructure. So far, the vectors that we're seeing are vectors that are well known. A lot of reflection amplification, a lot of direct path attacks that are SYN flooding, RST flooding, and null flooding, and ACK flooding, and that sort of thing. Also, a lot of both small and large packet direct path UDP flooding as well. Sometimes to interesting ports that look like defaults, like going to port 7777. One thing that we're looking into is we're getting some indications that some servers that are extranet partners with organizations in other parts of the world may have actually been popped and are being used to do things like scan for reflectors and amplifiers, probe, doing pre-attack reconnaissance of other systems, and even launching some outbound DDoS attacks. And so, we're looking at those indications. Something else that we're seeing is some what may be, and we're not sure about this, is some deliberate spoofing to try and induce organizations to deny legitimate comms from certain source networks and we believe that what may be happening is the attackers may be spoofing the IP addresses of those networks and launching DDoS attacks in order to try and provoke the defenders into blocking traffic. So those are some of the kinds of things that we're seeing. One other thing is that's a little bit unique is we've seen what look like attempts to either take down RTMP ingesters, which RTMP is used for internet live streaming, but the attackers are attacking UDP port 1935 instead of TCP port 1935, or the alternative hypothesis is that the attackers know this and they're counting on the defenders not having a good network access control policy, and so they're trying to smuggle UDP DDoS attack traffic past ACLs and defenses that maybe aren't as tightly configured as they should be. So those are the kinds of things that we're observing right now.
Oh, good, thank you. And Krista.
Hi, I'm Krista Hickey. I'm with TELUS. We're an ISP, and we also have a lot of other parts of business like TELUS Agriculture, et cetera. So, I mean, I'll echo what the other panelists have said, and maybe just reinforce Damien's point that, some of these attacks, specifically the UDP amplification attacks, are facilitated by spoof traffic. And given that there is a lot of concern about these attacks, I would encourage any and all operators or anybody that's in the business of moving packets around to please review your spoofing filters and maybe your customers' traffic, and assist in this kind of global effort to cut down on spoof traffic if at all possible. Otherwise, Roland probably has a much better visibility of the global ecosystem that's going on right now than I do. So I'll just give some observations from my perspective. So again, primarily we are a service provider, so we have a lot of customers, and right now all those customers are, in some cases, rightly so, very, very nervous and paranoid. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of that paranoia turning into panic a little bit, and perhaps people kind of rushing to conclusions, maybe not clearly looking at their baselines and, you know, looking, if you're going to look for some traffic that seems indicative of, you know, related to this conflict, you're probably going to find it right now, but that does not mean that you are specifically being attacked. That said, you know, this conflict is not over, and just because we haven't seen some events here, at least in Canada and potentially North America, DDoS-wise, we're still being quite vigilant with it. So those are kind of my observations right now. I think it's a kind of wait and see thing, and it is good to be paranoid and be vigilant, but I would caution everybody to avoid rushing to conclusions, because we will need our energy if an event happens, and we don't want to waste time chasing red herrings.
Okay, so I was looking to see if anybody brings up questions, and if people will bring up questions, you know, just pop them in the chat. But I've set this up to be a Q&A and a conversation. I'm really, really, really thankful for all four of you to come on board and tonight during the session. So now let's have a little thought exercise. So imagine us, instead of being on Zoom, we're sitting around in a bar or a table or something like that. And so, Krista, we'll start with you since you're the last one. And we got to be mindful. We don't want to get, like, you know, NDA stuff and things like that. So ask a question to the rest of your fellow panelists, and we'll go around. So what question would you like to hear from Roland and Ivan and Damien, or even me? I can speak up too. You know, of saying, like, okay, what do you guys, you know, pose a question to us. We'll go around, and then the rest of you, same thing. We're going to go around the table, just like we're at you know, after the conference session.
You're gonna put me on the spot, eh? I don't think it's a really controversial question, but maybe a question that might get asked at a bar. And it's kind of a bit cliche, but you know, what is the somewhat feasible, like you see it could be a possibility in the next 1 to 2 years, DDoS or DOS attack that would keep you awake at night?
So, Damien, you want to go first? We'll just kind of go around the table that way. We'll keep you up at night.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I used to worry a little bit more about things, but, you know, monitoring, being, for me, the most important thing is being aware that there is an attack, that there is some sort of problem with an outage, and having it be escalated. I sleep better knowing that people will wake me up if they need to. I also have a team on the other side of the world, so, you know, generally we just pit people on whichever side of the world the sun is on, or the ones handling attacks. In terms of what I would worry about is, you know, I guess probably, you know, as we get more power sort of given out to people, like, you know, we're now giving people gigabit fiber to the home, and, you know, I just sort of think about all these compromised IoT machines at people's homes that, you know, now can build up into larger attacks. I also worry about, you know, the power of clouds, right? If somebody can give a stolen credit card to a cloud provider and have infinite resources, then that's pretty scary. You know, so there's a lot of different ways that people could gain access to significant resources. Most of them are sort of slowly growing, and we have time to learn and adapt. But, you know, the things I worry about are where somebody comes up with something, either a new way of getting access to a very large number of machines, or just a new attack method. One thing I'll close with on this is that just because you have access to a huge number of machines, like gaining access to a botnet, if somebody finds a new exploit, they sort of corner the market on that, but that's only lasts for a short period of time. So we saw this with the Mirai botnet, where at one point, you know, one group of kids had access to all of the vulnerable machines. But then once they published the source code for Mirai, now there are 20 different groups of kids who are all competing over that, and they each get a 5% share, and suddenly the attacks are very small. So I think many times attacks are, these new methods are very briefly scary, and then they stop being a huge threat as time goes on. And so that was one example we saw that with the Memcached reflection amplification stuff as well. Anyway, I'll end here and let somebody else speak up.
Oh, thanks. Ivan.
IPv6. So, and specifically IPv6 and large cloud platform abuse. I think that's what will keep me awake in the next few years, for sure. I mean, we kind of largely dual stack already, and we already seen some humble beginnings of that, and I think it will grow.
Wow. Roland.
Outbound and crossbound, very specifically both with the wireline home broadband as well as 5G now, because we're really seeing quantum increase in speeds and throughput, and we're seeing many more devices are going to be put online. And I think that outbound and crossbound has always been a problem, because obviously DDoS packets originate somewhere, and so this is going to be a big challenge. I think that we as an industry are going to be forced to move away from a default posture of DDoS defense and move towards a default posture of DDoS suppression. And I think that's really important. And the access networks have a very big role to play on that. And with regards to the high capacity servers, being enlisted in DDoS attacks, we've recently seen direct path attacks that are 2.5 terabits per second and larger being launched, not using reflection amplification vectors, but directly. And these are from Intel for Mirai enslaved machines that have been subsumed into botnets and are being used to launch these attacks. This sort of thing is definitely going to continue, and so this is a problem, of course, for the targets. It's a problem for all the intermediate networks that are carrying the attack traffic, and it's a huge collateral impact issue for the networks where these high capacity sources reside.
Oh, thanks. And we got a comment coming in. Rob Thomas, when he heard about Damien talking about a gigabit attack hitting a home, and then Roland, you talked about suppression. And last week we had the APRICOT tutorials, so we got the DDoS resiliency, kind of like the start of rebuilding the entire program for the workshop. But one of the things that we pointed out that we saw with spoofer data is that ingress and egress packet filtering, which used to be very strong, 15 years ago in the service providers, has the law of entropy has kicked in, and the spoofer data is showing that those things have disintegrated. So something simple like Rob pointed out about DNS filtering and SMTP filtering. Canada, I think Canada was the first place who did let's do some of this proactive port filtering, right? And it seems like that is one of the things to pay attention to. Like, you're hearing this as a key theme from all the speakers and all the talks with it, is that security hygiene is an important theme that everybody keeps on bringing up, in different phraseology in different ways, but that's security hygiene. And every network has a way to do the part. Roland, your turn to ask question. Then we'll go to Krista and Damien. We'll rotate around the table, pass the baton. What question would you like to ask everybody?
Sure. So I have a question. One of the things, and I alluded to this in my pre-recorded segment, is that we're seeing attackers who are doing a lot more pre-attack reconnaissance, and they're also paying attention to the efficacy of the attacks. And when they see a defender, institute one set of countermeasures or defensive measures, then they'll switch tactics, and sometimes they seem to have a playbook. Has anyone yet come up against what they believe to be an automated system that is using machine learning technologies, that has some sort of rules-based expert system? Has anyone had the feeling that they've been fighting a machine? I haven't run into that yet, but it's something that's very concerning to me.
That was my scary thing. So Krista, what do you, have you seen that or felt that?
No. So if it is happening, it's not very effective. So no.
Damien, how about your experience with it?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anything that appeared completely automated. there was always a human on the other side, and sometimes I even interacted with that human. You know, you can pass sort of subtle messages back and forth, or spy on what they're doing. Sometimes, certainly, things can seem somewhat mechanical, in that they're just modifying it in a sort of predictable way, but nothing completely automated yet. I think that's something to look forward to in the future. We'll probably get there. I also worry a lot about automated defenses. A lot of companies, including mine, are sort of looking at how do we do artificial intelligence and have it automatically detect the signature of an attack. And once you do that, you're starting that arms race of the attackers then start using artificial intelligence to try to figure out how to blend in better. So I think we have very interesting times ahead.
Oh, yeah. Ivan.
No. I mean, there's all the cases, it's usually human on the other end. And I mean, you can, in some cases, you can kind of pick up where they're from and their working hours and whatnot, but there's always a human.
Well, Ivan, what's interesting is I've had conversations like this with this, and if, I think you and I remember when there was a threat actor or actors pay attention to New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it was like, as we're looking at the different attack types, because they're rotating different attack types. And it was like they picked up the old DDoS security workshop, and they went page 1, page 2, page 3, yep. Right? And I think that's the worry with if you can quantify and say here's A, B, C, or like, as Damien mentioned, right? There's predictable patterns. I think that's where that Roland's question comes out. So Ivan, your turn. Ask the group a question.
Ooh. So if you have like one advice to the actual end victims of these attacks, what that advice would be?
Okay, there you go, Roland.
Preparation. You absolutely have to be prepared. Most DDoS attacks succeed due to the unpreparedness of the defenders, and you have to take this into account in your business continuity model, disaster planning model, whatever you want to call it. You have to say that I'm going to put availability at least on the same level of importance as I place confidentiality and integrity. Because if you lose availability, I guess you have perfect confidentiality and integrity because nobody can access anything. But we really, really have to see that, because when you're talking about availability, especially, you can't, and I work for a vendor, full disclosure, but you can't just buy boxes or buy software and install that and then say, okay, I've solved DDoS. There are actually architectural principles that have to be imbued in the network design and the ancillary supporting services, and there are operational practices that have to be followed, and you have to have a plan, and you have to have escalation paths and all these different kinds of things. And at 4 in the morning on a Sunday, when everything's down and management are screaming, is not the best time to figure that out. So prepare, assume the worst, be prepared to sustain 100% of incoming traffic as being hostile, and you'll be okay.
There you go. Oh, Krista. What's the advice?
Well, I think the question was what advice to those victims. So I'm going to assume that at this point they haven't heeded Roland's advice and they have not prepared. So I think my first piece of advice would be don't panic. That's not going to help anything. Analyze the data that you are able to obtain, and also understand what impact this is truly having to your business. A website going down that as others have mentioned, that may not have that much material on it, may not be that big of an impact to your business. And then finally, to the best of your ability, capture as much information as you can throughout that incident, so that later on you can have a post-mortem on that incident, understand where your gaps are and lessons learned, so that next time, because there is going to be a next time, you're going to be better prepared for it.
Oh, great. And Damien.
Yeah, so I think for me, the key thing here is to remember that DDoS, even if you're not receiving an extortion threat, is really an issue of financial impact. You're receiving financial impact to your business, and you need to figure out what that financial impact is and how severe is it. So, in some cases, maybe you want to pay for a DOS mitigation provider. In other cases, you might say, this attack doesn't actually matter that much. We'd rather not pay for a DOS mitigation provider. We can afford the downtime. Another thing that you can think about is, what is the critical part? What is the actual impact to your business from this? So, I often like to think of it as, solving DDoS is really easy because you're starting with everything is down. Any improvement you can make to even be partially up is a big win. So, you can sacrifice various parts of your site. So a common attack is to recognize, if you have a blog that allows comments, then any comment on that blog probably requires a database update, and anybody viewing those comments now has to read that database to get the list of comments on that blog. All you have to do is disable comments. The blog is still active, everyone can still read it. They probably won't even notice that comments are disabled, but you have removed that attack vector, you've mitigated the damage to basically nothing, and you've gotten yourself back up. So that's one example of something that you can do. There are many other examples where you sacrifice some subset of users maybe, or maybe you give them a CAPTCHA. It's not a great user experience, but your site is up. The users who want to get there can still get there. So that it's all about damage mitigation.
That's a good one. This is really great. And Damien, you're last up. You get to ask everybody a question. What would you like to get from them? What their opinion is?
So I'm curious how everyone thinks we could make progress on educating the owners of compromised devices, especially when they don't even realize that their refrigerator is connected to the internet.
Oh, Ivan, how do you do it down under?
Without owners of these devices knowing. So, we operate a couple of kind of reasonably large fixed line internet service providers here. And for a few years, what we actually have been doing is by default, then a customer subscribes. And then, by the way, majority of our customers these days are 1 gig fiber. So when customer does subscribe, we actually apply a BNG filter by default. So that blocks the common ports that, the customer gets dynamically allocated IP, and actually they get one IPv4 and a bunch of IPv6. But then, does this customer doesn't need to run a NTP server, DNS server, or even a web server? So so most common abused ports are blocked by default on the BNG. And if customer willing to or needs to expose themselves or expose some services, they can go to the self-service portal, tick that checkbox and disable it, but by default it's enabled. And for most people, that just works. So
that's good to hear. We probably want to do a session on how you guys set up that architecture for others to learn. Roland.
I think the most effective security tool that any access provider has is the AUP. And so the kind of things that Ivan was talking about, they need to be written into the AUP and users accept them. And then you use technology like a default, outbound network access control policy, things like a quarantine system to grab the attention of users when they have devices that have unknowingly to them been compromised and are used to launch outbound and crossbound attacks. You have to be able to quarantine them in such a way that you don't disrupt emergency communications, but that you also can grab their attention and get the attention of a human being to contact the help desk. And you also have to be staffed well enough to deal with incoming calls and so forth, especially if you end up with a particular very popular type of device that ends up being compromised en masse. But the AUP and then all the technological enforcement of that and the ability to tell people when they're having when they're being part of the problem, and help them get out of being part of the problem.
Nice. Krista.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll keep it short for now. So I spent a long time doing that type of work and thinking about it. So I totally agree with the previous comments. But on the topic of notification itself, there are things, as Roland just kind of mentioned, like walled gardens or kind of quarantine, where you kind of force them to look at a page that might tell them something or to call somebody. But even simpler, I think at this point, and I think I mentioned it in one of my responses to your other questions, Barry, is that in many countries, I know at least here in Canada, we have copyright legislation. And the nature of that copyright legislation is that rights holders will submit a report, which is basically an IP and a timestamp. And then, or ISPs like myself, we are legally obligated to, or legislatively obligated to do lookups on that and then forward on a notification. So we're not sending any information back to the rights holder about our customer. We're just simply obligated to forward that notification on. And in that notification, it just says, hey, you're a violation of copyright. Go visit this government page about it, or respond to the rights holder. That's your choice. We're kind of the mailman in this scenario. So I think first and foremost, for at least countries where this is legislated to some extent, we can just reuse it's the same IP lookup. It's the same kind of mechanisms to forward on these notifications. So I think that could be a relatively kind of quick and dirty win to get those notifications out there. Now, of course, the next problem that service providers have is that it does cost money to take those calls. And as someone who did that work for a very long time, you'll get everything from people saying, kind of getting very, very concerned and, maybe too much concerned and taking up a lot of time, to the other side where people are like, yeah, I'm aware of that and I don't care, which is where a strong AUP really needs to come in. And there are times that maybe, that customer is not appropriate for your network. So I think, there are mechanisms in place that we can kind of slightly tweak, because if a lot of service providers out there already had to implement systems and they're spending resources to forward on copyright notifications, why can't we reuse those systems for security notifications? But again, the second part is that kind of, I'll just call it hand-holding of those end users, because they will need some guidance. And in some cases, that's going to be pointing them to a vendor who maybe help them turn on auto updates on their internet refrigerator, or potentially this could be a rolled up public service like governments could play, is that instead of all these individual ISPs coming up with, here's the remediation steps for your internet refrigerator, maybe government sources could, be a reliable source of information that all of us service providers could point to, because again, it's reliable for the user because they know that that's their local government. And number two, that takes away the burden of all these different service providers kind of reinventing the wheel and kind of maybe in some cases giving conflicting information. So that's my answer to that question.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone. We're at the top of the hour for this session. I really want to thank everybody's participation here. One of the things that those of you who have not seen or heard conversations like this from this level of experience, this is the reason why I did the roundtable, have everybody ask questions. This is what happens when we all get on a phone call with each other and we're talking through a DDoS problem. Chris's nodding her head says, "Yep, this is how we talk to each other, trying to figure out how to do it." And APRICOT is a forum that where we're trying to bring people into these communities. We're working together cross-organizationally, internationally to have a safer network and keep the packets flowing and keep our customers happy. So thank you everybody for your time. I think Philip, we can end the video and you can do your thank yous.
All right, thank you very much for that, Barry. That was a superb panel discussion. It's one I've been looking forward to actually the whole week, even after your tutorials last week. So I was really looking forward to this one, and you have delivered. That's just been great. So thank you to Roland, Damien, Krista, and Ivan for joining us live. And also thank you to Richard and Alexander who contributed to your videos as well, Barry. So that was great. So thank you all very much for this.
recording has stopped.
There we go.
I've done the necessary thing to get the recording stopped.
Now, of course, the online tradition has been, okay, recording stopped. So what questions do people want to ask everybody that they don't want on tape?
Well, this is still being streamed live, so it'll be on YouTube.
Okay.
No escape. So, last week we didn't stream live, but this week this is very much streamed live. So anyway, thank you all very much. We have a 50-minute break now before the next session. So once I've finished speaking here, we'll just drop back to the intermission slides. We will see you all back in 50 minutes time for, well, some DNS operations, which Warwick will be looking after for us. So thanks all very much, and we'll see you back in about 15 minutes.
IPv4.global, from Hilco Stream Bank. Backed by Hilco Global, IPv4.global has completed thousands of transfers. Our online marketplace serves address blocks and ASNs of all sizes and regions. Transparent, experienced, reliable. IPv4.global.
You don't call your mum via a chain of other people's phones. So why would your Australian network be any different? One internet exchange service makes single-point national connectivity in the Australian market as simple as IAA. Carrier-neutral, high-performance, unmetered peering from IAA. Because your users deserve it.
In Asia, the IP address management is managed by an organization called APNIC. Then, APNIC appointed IDNIC, APG, to run the IP address management process, especially in Indonesia.
Team Cymru delivers no-cost threat monitoring to internet service providers and hosting providers who partner with us. Nimbus Threat Monitor gives you near real-time threat detection, illuminating the compromised assets on your network and those of your clients by correlating your network flows with our world-class IP reputation data. Saving and improving lives is Team Cymru's mission, and making the internet a safer place is integral to that mission. Take advantage of our peer signal threat detection today.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your short break, get a breath of fresh air, some refreshments. And welcome to the session about DNS operations. And I would like to hand over to our session chair, Warwick Mitchell. All yours, Warwick.
Thanks for that, Philip. Welcome, everybody. And I'd like to welcome you to the DNS operations section of the APRICOT conference. We have some great sessions coming up from Jeff, from Dwayne, and from Yin. And with that in mind, I would like to hand over to Jeff and let him get underway. And the floor is yours, Jeff.
Look, thanks a lot for that. And as you said, time is short and I have way too many slides. So I'll just launch straight into this. I actually want to take a big view of the DNS. And this time I actually want to look at what we commonly call openness, and I don't mean open markets, which economists love to talk about, but I actually want to talk about open as in the sense that everyone can use it. Because, of course, this is a big issue with many of the aspects of the internet. Is it truly accessible for everyone? Can everyone access the DNS? And, of course, the entire point of the DNS is, of all of the things on the internet, the DNS is the one piece of common technology. And more to the point, not only can everyone access it, but everyone gets the same answer, irrespective of who you are. It doesn't depend on who you are, where you are, whether you're using, a phone or a desktop computer, what operating system, none of that, nothing. The answer is always going to be the same, because that's the way we intended the DNS to work. It's just the same answer. It's consistent. It's openly accessible. So if we ask that particular question, can everyone access the DNS? The answer is, well, clearly yes. Or is it? Because if you sort of scratch the surface of it, the answer is no. We're actually playing tricks in the DNS all the time. I live in Australia, and there are certain domain names that my internet service provider is obliged not to resolve on my behalf, for which I thank them. But Australia isn't anomalous. Almost every country on the planet has various rules that have their service providers playing tricks and games in the DNS, because for all kinds of national motives, regulatory regimes require that certain sites and domain names aren't accessible to users. So it's not fully open. ISPs also are guilty sometimes of playing strange games in the DNS. One of them is to try and make money out of the DNS, and making money out of it isn't that hard if you think weirdly. And one of the ways to do that is, instead of sending you back, that name doesn't exist, I could say, the name you asked for didn't exist, but I'm not going to tell you that it didn't exist. I'm going to send you to a search engine. There's a clear signal that where you're going to doesn't exist in the DNS, but this search engine will help you get to where you want to go. The search engine will give me a cut of whatever it is, money that's flying around, and I will make money out of the DNS. Happy me, but such structural lying on the DNS is not appreciated. And of course, there are other folk who actually make it a feature that they don't answer every DNS query. Quad9 is one of the ones that certainly make this prominent, that they will not resolve names that they believe is associated with malware and other forms of threats. And they say that's a positive. And who am I to argue with them? But the point is, it's not all the DNS all the time. It's not fully open everywhere. And so in some ways, these are reviewed in various ways. It's sovereign rights. We can't argue with states. And quite frankly, threat mitigation, might as well try and help you if I can. It's a bummer if you start to get your machine infected with malware. So maybe it's a good thing. Of course, it is a problem when the DNS gets used in a different fight. If it's trying to block me from somewhere that I'm determined to get to. Because if that's the case, I then think of strange and wonderful ways to get around that block. And we start this war of escalation between the blocker and the determined evader to try and get around these kinds of issues. And quite frankly, the blocker always loses. It's just a waste of everyone's time when we start to get into those games. Does it matter? Well, it's a sideshow, really. Because maybe when we talk about true openness, it's not these sort of petty wars around the margins of DNS consistency, but more about this idea that the DNS is actually not the DNS. It's actually a whole bunch of separate little technology artifacts that, working together, actually creates a name resolution system. And if I want to be a new resolver provider, if I want to be a provider of new authoritative service, if I want to be an actor in the DNS, can I realize my dream? Is this place open for new entrants? Is it an open system? And I know I'm referring there intentionally to the open systems interconnect architecture that had its heyday in the 1980s, which was actually a contrast to the closed vendor proprietary systems that were around at the time. And this is quite deliberate. Now, is the DNS specified by open standards in a way that the technology is accessible to everyone? And the answer is, well, yeah. You know, there might be a lot of RFCs that collectively specify the DNS. Some would argue too many, and they might not always be consistent, and some would argue that's a feature, not a bug. But nevertheless, yes, the DNS is certainly specified to the extent that it can be specified. And there are many, many functional implementations of the DNS protocol these days. Early days, it was just bind, but you know, these days there are a lot of implementations out there. Interestingly, the DNS is promiscuous. It's open insofar as if I stand up a name server, the intention is, no matter who you are, I'll answer you. No matter who you are, I will answer you. So the servers are open. The information is openly available. Like, I'm not trying to hide what's in the DNS. And so these queries and responses are fully open, fully, which itself is just the cause of the problem, because what will happen is that openness has become a phenomenal weakness. Why? Because you don't pay for much of the internet directly. The ad tech industry, as we like to call it, or otherwise known as the surveillance economy, actually drives the huge majority of money flows on the internet these days. You pay for very, very little. Advertising picks up the rest of the tab. And oddly enough, you know, the biggest window of what you and I do online is the DNS. Everything we do starts with a call on the DNS. If I could see your stream of queries, there's nothing else I need to know about you. I know everything you're doing. I probably know everything you're going to do. And oddly enough, if I could edit responses that are provided to you, I could make things disappear, just completely disappear and be inaccessible to you. The DNS is an incredible window onto what we do on the entirety of the internet. And of course, it's at this point you have to bring up the XKCD cartoons, because, you know, this one is true as well. Google didn't need anything else. All they needed was the 888 DNS server, and, you know, the rest is over. They know everything. So the DNS is actually the core of the internet. It's central. This mapping system that takes humanly used labels and kind of map them into IP services is actually at the heart of all of this. So this system, as I said, is open, right? Queries go in, responses come out. Yet that cloud is one of the most opaque parts of the entire internet. Once you send a query into the DNS, you can't trace it. There's no trace count. There's no TTL, hop count. Your query isn't passed inward. You pass it to someone, a resolver, who stashes that query and makes up a query of its own and asks other people. And it's very difficult to trace which input query matches which output query. It's almost like the system inside the wetware in your head, the neuron system. Trying to trace individual signals as they pass across neuron to neuron is almost impossible. Interestingly, the DNS has very similar properties, although one could argue whether what you're seeing is intelligence in that life form or not. But, you know, what's going on is the DNS has no query tracing, no way of probing. There could be queries circling in the DNS for years. No one would know. And quite frankly, we have no idea of the level of interdependency in the DNS, nor do we really have any clue about the ongoing level of centralization of infrastructure functions. Is the DNS something we all play in, or is there only 2 or 3 players left? How centralized is this? Difficult questions because the DNS is so well hidden. And in fact, the fact that it works is a modern day miracle. The fact that it works really quickly, and it is blindingly fast, and handles trillions of queries is just a miracle. So it's more than mapping, and it's way much more than just a simple cloud. But what is it? Well, if I asked what the DNS is, I guess I could get the following sets of answers and probably more, because we use that term, the DNS, to describe the space of names, the process of registering my favorite domain name, etc. All of these things are actually in the DNS. How are they orchestrated to actually provide the coherent whole? And the answer is, well, it's the magic of markets. No one's in charge. Nothing. Nobody. It only works in this completely deregulated space because of markets and market signaling. So if we really wanted to understand the way the DNS operates, I suspect we've actually got to understand what markets are there and how do they operate. That's the critical question, the question that really drives everything else. And so we really need to look at more than just the markets, the market needs. Some are emergent, some are well established. To what extent these markets are open and to what extent they're failing. So it's not a single marketplace, it's a collection of interdependent and tightly coupled markets. Many elements, standards, technology, players, etc., all of which kind of work together to produce a DNS, but without any form of central orchestration. Okay, so that's a lot to talk about, isn't it? Because I wanted to talk about the DNS in terms of openness, I would have to go through every single one of these things, and I've got, a few minutes left. That's not going to work. So let's just take a couple of points. And one is a market for trust. Do you believe what you learn from the DNS? You shouldn't, because you can't, because it's an open protocol. There are so many ways that it can be altered by others, for malicious or even benign measures, but it can be altered. And so you can't trust it. Now, is that what we want? No. Is that what name publishers want? Is that what we want from the DNS? An untrustable framework? Well, of course not. So over the last 20 years, yes, 2-0, we spent a lot of time trying to build a thing called DNSSEC to actually put signatures into domain name responses so you could check if it was real or not. So you'd think that a trustable DNS would be used by everybody all the time. Domain name owners would like to see it. Domain name users would like to see it because trust is good, right? How well has it worked? Who uses DNSSEC to validate responses? Saudi Arabia? Somalia? I'm like, the bits that are green aren't exactly coloring the globe, and the bits that are red are an awful lot of places. So even now when we look hard, less than 30% of the users, 28%, sit behind validating resolvers. Now, you could take that as a good sign, or wow, 3/4 of the internet can't trust the answer because their DNS isn't even checking whether there's a DNSSEC signature. How many people sign their domain names? Even less. So in some ways, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because DNSSEC is a huge overhead. And if you try and make things slower, no one likes you. And that's what's happened. The current framework for DNSSEC says, look, you may want trust, but you're unwilling to pay for it. A lot of effort, what folk regard as a marginal gain. And so what happens is you get market failure. Users don't pay. As a user, you have no choice in what you query for. So you can't even express a preference for signed names. And the benefits are indirect. Who does the work and who gets the benefit don't align, because you and I don't pay for queries. And so trust is a market failure. We all want it, but no one gets it. And if Google's service didn't actually do it, it would never have happened even today, even at that 30% level, because it's really only Google's public DNS service used by, coincidentally, around 30% of users, that's actually given DNSSEC even a visible place in this market. Without that, trust would have completely failed. So we're talking about DNS resolvers. Is that an open market? Oh, you sort of, but it's pretty weird. Around 70% of you use the resolver in your own ISP. Around 30% of you use Google service. A few of you go to a resolver in the same country, and everyone else is down there in fractions of a percent. If open resolvers are a market, then Google has just under 30%. The next biggest is Cloudflare with 4%. Open DNS, I think it's called Cisco's umbrella, 2%, and so on. So it's this gigantic mammoth, this behemoth, and a few little tiny mosquitoes around the edge. This is not a market. This is definitely not a market. This is a failed market. Why did Google succeed and everyone else basically fail? Because the name resolution economy is broken. No one pays to get their names resolved. So if I set up an open resolver, all I'm doing is opening up my bank account. The more you use it, the more I pay. Great business model. Where do I get money from? Well, you don't. And Google was special because while this open resolver market was a failure, Google was the only one that actually said, there's a reason why I'm here. Google are protecting their search asset, the thing that gives them 95% of their revenue. And if you start using the DNS as a de facto search engine, it's Google that has the problem. So interestingly, they had a commercial interest to protect a core asset by running an open resolver that never lied. No other service provider shares Google's motivation. And that's why Google has been quite happy to invest in this market where everyone else goes, oh, not sure I want to go there. It's just a bonfire. The last thing I actually want to talk about today, and just to get to the heart of this, is actually what happens with this. What keeps the DNS together as a cohesive whole? Why do we all try and get the same answer from the DNS? Why don't we get different answers? What's stopping the DNS from fragmenting? The name resolution economy, as I've said, is a mess. No one pays. The ISP sort of picks up the tab because they're the last person standing. But what if I want to innovate in the DNS? What if I want to add more query types, add more behaviors? What if I want to change things? Well, the problem is that these ISPs are not motivated to invest more money in the DNS. It's a cost center, not a revenue center. So if I want to change the DNS, I've got to persuade these folk who do 70% of all the resolution to change their infrastructure. And as far as I can see, they have been resistant all the way down the line. And it's not just them. It's even the stub resolver that sits in my CPE, my modem, on my wired network. All those services don't change easily. It's sunk cost. There's no revenue coming out of it. No one wants to change it. So when I try and do DNS over TLS, DNS over HTTPS, DNS over foo and over bar, in the mainstream market, they're all failures. A lot of hype, little action, but maybe not quite the full story. Because realistically, this is not a tension between players, it's a tension across elements of the stack. It's applications who actually want more from the DNS, and the infrastructure, the employed and deployed DNS servers and resolvers that are resisting that. The application infrastructure could just simply pay for everyone else to upgrade. They're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to drive the DNS into the application space and lift themselves out of the existing infrastructure. They're going to use DNS over HTTPS to tunnel through the existing infrastructure. Encryption is there to protect their innovation. It has nothing to do with your privacy or my privacy. It's a case of hiding those queries from infrastructure interference. And because applications have money, that's where the money is these days, they're quite happy to spend money on innovating for themselves at the application level and ignoring the existing infrastructure. Why? Because all the money's in content. And so increasingly what you're seeing is functions are moving up the application stack, up the protocol stack, into the application level. What's quick? It's transport in the user space. What's DNS over HTTPS? It's the DNS in user space. That way we don't have to get everyone to upgrade. We don't have to get all these ISPs to do something, change CPE. We just ignore it. Applications no longer have to sustain a single namespace. They can do what they want, and they will, because they have the money and they have the drive to do that. And they're not going to pay for everyone else to come along with them. And so it's certainly true that where we're going, we'll still call it the DNS, but, you know, with apologies to the Trekkies, you know, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it, because we're moving away from network-centric networking. We're commoditizing the network and stripping it of role and value. And the DNS is being swept up in that stripping. It's changing in almost every respect, because as we move it up into the applications, we're not moving up the DNS. We're moving up a whole bunch of namespaces and name signaling as at the application level. It's a different world. It's a world that actually fragments almost by its very nature. Keeping it together is going to prove incredibly hard. So is the DNS open? Yes, sort of not. The cracks are showing, and it's going to get worse. Why? Because market forces are just going to keep this together. And as I said right at the start, no one's looking after the DNS as a whole. It's a market problem. And the benefits of a single cohesive open namespace look like becoming an inevitable victim of the tragedy of the commons. We've done it before, and we'll do it to the DNS as well, because, you know, we can. And I think I've used almost all my time there, Warren. So, Warren, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. Is there any questions that anyone wants to ask Jeff? I haven't seen anything in the chat other than the slides, which has been answered, so that's all good. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, Jeff. And we'll move on to Dwayne. And he's going to be talking to us about message digest in the DNS or for DNS zones. So over to you, Dwayne. Dwayne, we can't hear you at the moment.
Yep. Sorry, just figured out I was muted.
No worries. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, we're good.
All right. So yeah, this talk is about message digests for DNS zones, and a little bit about some future plans for including this into the root zone. So the first part of this talk we'll go over sort of what is a zone digest and how does it work. So the gist of it is it's a cryptographic digest or hash of the data in a DNS zone, and it's conveniently embedded into the zone data itself using a new resource record type named ZoneMD. A zone publisher will compute its digest value, put it into the zone, and then a recipient of the zone data can use that to verify that the data that it receives is authentic as originally published. So this is analogous to checksum files that you likely see in software distributions. This here particular example is from Ubuntu. So in the place where you would download an Ubuntu ISO file, there's also a file named SHA-256 sums. And then there's also a PGP signature over that checksum file so that you can verify the authenticity of that. And the ZoneMD is very similar to this, except that we put the digest into the zone itself. So a little bit more about how it works. This is all documented and specified in RFC 8976. The data in the zone is given as input to a digest function. What's critical is that the zone data is processed in a well-defined and consistent ordering and in a well-defined and consistent format. And it turns out that DNSSEC also has requirements around ordering and format. And so ZoneMD reuses those same specifications for ordering and formatting. So when you calculate the digest or the ZoneMD record, you have to exclude the ZoneMD record itself and its signatures. Otherwise, you get kind of a self-referential problem there. But at the end, the digest is added to the zone and then ideally signed with DNSSEC. And that's all shown in this little graphic at the bottom here. So you might wonder, why is this useful? Why is this something that people are interested in? Well, the idea is that it protects the zone data at rest. So this is providing data security rather than channel security. It can be useful in distributing zone data between primary and secondary name servers, especially in situations where you have maybe multiple layers of distribution or multiple parties or groups involved in the distribution of zone data. If you've been paying attention, you've probably heard about RFC 8806, which is a method for serving root zone data local to a resolver. And so that's driving a lot of this. There are some other potential uses for ZoneMD in things like ICANN's centralized zone data service and in response policy zones. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about how all this works. At the top here is an example ZoneMD record, which has, after the ZoneMD type field, there's 4 numeric fields. The first is the serial field. And here, the idea is that the serial field in the ZoneMD record needs to match the SOA serial number. So that's just an additional check saying that this record came from this version of the zone. The next field is called the scheme. And the RFC defines one scheme called the simple scheme. And then there's a range of private use schemes. But the interesting one here is value 1, which is the simple scheme, which basically just takes all of the data in the zone and sort of processes it as a single unit to compute the hash. The next field is the hash algorithm field. And here there are 2 standardized hash algorithms. There's SHA-384 and SHA-512. And then again, there's a number of private use algorithms. And then the last one is this long hexadecimal digest field, right? So the length of this depends on the chosen hash algorithm. For SHA-384, this field is always 48 octets long, and for SHA-512, it's always 64 octets long. The RFC stipulates that even for a private use algorithm, this field must never be less than 12 octets in length. This table shows some of the current implementations of the ZoneMD protocol. There's one of these is sort of the reference implementation that we used when working on the RFC and whatnot. We also have an implementation in Unbound, in the LDNS library. There's a DNS tools project from Nick Chile Labs. The Power DNS Resolver has implemented this and will be available in their next release. The Not DNS authoritative name server has implemented it as a version 3.1.0. And the Not Resolver and Bind, there's some work underway for those. So I expect those implementations to support this pretty soon as well. And then the Perl library supports this, but only for parsing the record. So I did some benchmarks to show how long it takes to compute the zone digest for zones of different sizes. Here used all the TLD zones and the root zone that were available from CCDNS. And this is a log plot, but you can see that it's got this pretty straightforward relationship. For the root zone, to calculate a digest for the root zone takes about 100 milliseconds. This, on sort of reasonable hardware. The largest zone that was tested was the .NET zone, and that took, I think, it's like about 10 minutes, maybe 600 seconds, something like that. So this is sort of some log file output from running the version of Unbound that supports this feature. So if you configure Unbound with this auth zone stanza, give it the name of the zone file, and tell it to check the zone MD record, then the logging will show sort of here at the bottom in the bold. It says that the zone MD hash is correct and zone verification was successful. So now I want to talk a little bit about plans for deploying zone MD into the root zone. So there's a ICANN committee called the Root Zone Evolution Review Committee, which has produced a document that has some recommendations around deploying zone MD for the root zone. These 4 recommendations are listed here. Some of these are still underway, and some of these have been completed. But briefly, one of the first steps is that the root zone maintainer, which is VeriSign, my company, and all the root server operators need to verify and confirm that adding the zone MD record will in no way negatively impact their ability to distribute and serve root zone data within the root server system. The internet community needs to be made aware of plans to use zone MD, and that's sort of why we're here today, why you're listening to this talk. Developers of name server software are encouraged to implement the feature, and you can see that is underway as well. And then lastly, PTI and the root zone maintainer should jointly develop a plan for deploying zone MD to the root zone and make it available for review to RZERC, and that is also currently underway. Tentatively, the deployment will look something like this. There would be a single zone MD record in the zone. It would happen in 2 different phases. In the first phase, the record would have a private use hash algorithm, which means that it's not verifiable by any of the implementations because they don't implement private use algorithms. And that would run for probably a period of 2 months or so. And during those 2 months, that's just proving that the presence of a record doesn't cause any negative impacts to the root server system. And then the second phase, that the hash algorithm will be converted to the SHA-384 digest. So at that point, it becomes verifiable. In some representations of the root zone that are in the presentation format or the master file format, the plan is to use the generic or unknown resource record format. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And the earliest that any of this could happen would be the next quarter of 2022. That's when VeriSign starts to deploy some of the software to support this feature. But we're still waiting on some other things to fall into place. So that's not a firm date. So regarding the presentation format, if you're not familiar, there are sort of 2 ways that a resource record can be written down or presented in zone files and whatnot. One is sort of its native format, which is the top line. And the other is this called generic or unknown resource record format. These 2 records here are equivalent. They contain the same data. They're just different representations of the same thing. So one concern we have is that folks who maybe take the root zone from the internic servers and use it in their custom tools and scripts, their own tools might not understand the zone MD record in its native format. And so to be a little bit more cautious, the proposal is to, at least initially, to put the zone MD record there in the generic format, which is the second one there. And that would make it a little bit more likely to survive any scripts that aren't aware of zone MD at this point. If I have time, I'll just kind of go over some of these potential frequently asked questions. So if you take anything away from this talk, I hope you take away that, VeriSign and ICANN are planning to add this record to the root zone in the coming months, sometime this year. For most users, there will be no impact, but anyone that uses the root zone in presentation format needs to be aware of this change. What sort of problems does this solve? We talked about this a little bit already, but the basic idea is that consumers of root zone data or any zone that deploys this protocol can be assured of the data's authenticity no matter where they got it from. And lastly, why is ZoneMD better or different than AXFR or IXFR with a TSIG key? Well, TSIG provides only temporary channel-based security, whereas ZoneMD provides more persistent data security. So one way to think about this is if say you're transferring the zone from somewhere using the traditional zone transfer mechanisms, it's saved on disk, right, after it's downloaded, and then let's say the name server restarts or the system reboots or whatever, and when it comes back up, it reads that data from disk. At that point, there is no, there's no any security provided by TSIG that has been lost. So the ZoneMD record, however, can provide the data security from loading it from disk or whatever. Also, TSIG, although it's used sort of internally by the root server operators, it's not available for the general public to use from many root zone sources, including the Internet servers or those root servers that do provide public zone transfer service. And some of those are listed in Appendix A of RFC 8806. I believe that's the end. So if we have time for questions, I'm happy to take them.
Absolutely. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask Dwayne? Just seeing if anyone's raised their hands. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions, Dwayne, but we might have some that'll pop up in the chat window shortly. So we might
Jeff's
come
got a
back to
question
you.
for me.
Yeah, I was a bit slow in typing, but
Sorry.
I was a bit slow in typing, but let me ask the leading question here. Dwayne, the root is this sort of common resource that we all need to look up, and that's just fine. But of course, if you actually look at the spread of queries, some of these top-level domains are also hotspots that could benefit from similar techniques of local caching of the entire zone file in order to make the DNS even faster than it is today. Are you aware of any plans by any TLD operators to use a similar approach for the next level down than the root to actually allow and facilitate this kind of local caching of an entire TLD zone?
I'm not really aware of anyone that's talked about that. I think, I mean, there was one sort of silly example, which is the ARPA zone. That's sort of in the similar category to the root zone. It's sort of openly available and very small, right? So you can do it there. I haven't heard anyone seriously suggested for TLDs. I think it could work, especially if it's not too much. If it's not a huge zone, I think it could work. But I haven't heard anyone make serious suggestions or offers to do anything like that yet.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? Otherwise, we will say thank you very much to Dwayne, and we'll move on to Yin, who's going to be talking to us about enhancing performance of DNS over HTTP using CDN Edge compute and Edge databases. Over to you, Yin.
Okay, I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes, we can see your backdrop. Yep.
Okay.
And we see your slides. Thank you.
All right. Hi. Thanks for it. So, hello everybody. Today I'm going to give a talk about implementing and scaling a DOH infrastructure. So my name is Yin Nung Chao. I'm a technical solutions architect at Akamai. So just a brief summary of what I will be talking about today. So we see increasingly application providers wanting to use their own DNS over HTTP server because of various reasons, which we'll just go into some motivations after this. And they find that scaling it perhaps is not such an easy task. I mean, setting up one server is easy, but scaling is not such an easy task. So we'll just show an example architecture of how you can scale it using an edge compute system together with an HDB, which can provide a performance enhancement for their own DOH infrastructure. But first, let us go into some motivations of why, let's say, an application provider would want to set up their DOH infrastructure. So first off is DNS hijacking. So a lot of them, this is a reason. They find that, let's say they have an app and they release it globally, and their users come from all over the world in various ISPs, but in certain parts of the world, they find their parts of their apps are hijacked. And of course, they would not like to do it. They would not like to happen for their users. And their hijack and links to malware or malicious stuff are put to their app. Also, on the privacy angle, they would like to keep the data to themselves, or which host name their app uses, what software as a service, third-party services the software uses. So if they use the normal DNS, the various actors along the path can collect the information about the app. Which is a quick example of how of a way that an app can be hijacked. So this is let's say a user-generated content app, UGC, and the bottom part is usually some messages or even an e-commerce store for them to buy things. But in certain locations, they found that this part of it was used to put a sort of advertisement to something else, another app, and it could be malware. Yeah. So that's one of the motivations. And yeah, of course, so DNS HTTP is one possible solution to their problem. But however, the DNS resolver quality is important because it has direct correlation with the consistency and predictability of the application. We don't want any lag on startup or anything like that, right? Or if it's a game, then we don't want any game lag. So the DOH has a really big influence on the total customer experience. And hence, if we move to that, they will want it to be as performant as possible. And just a very brief overview of DOH, but I'm sure you know. So it's doing the DNS over HTTPS in a HTTPS session, and it's over port 443. So it's together with the other HTTPS traffic, making it harder to filter rather than DNS over TLS. And it moves the DNS resolution to the application layer. That's why the application providers can do the DNS resolution themselves. And it also has a JSON format, so it makes it very easy because I mean most application developers today are very familiar with transferring and using data in JSON format, right? So it makes it very easy to program within the app. And yeah, some of the benefits which we said just now was it prevents eavesdropping from intermediaries. It can overcome the problem of DNS hijacking. The application to resolve a connection is encrypted and hidden within the web traffic, so people cannot try to look what host name the application is resolving, and you use your own resolver depending on the underlying OS, let's say the Android OS resolver. And why wouldn't you use private? Why would you set up private? So using public DOH resolvers, I mean, it's still concentration of information in a few companies, and if you use your own private, you can mine your own information for usage. So that one way. And how did it get started? So we've seen some people originally they get started by just a very simple implementation. So they have the DOH server in their own data center or in a cloud service, which they set up themselves, and all their clients just reach out to it, and all over the world. And as you can see, that there's problems with this. So there's a problem of performance of single DOH server. And you of course have to scale it, right? So scaling the TCP and TLS for encrypted DNS takes a lot of resources, and also there's a DDoS risk. So there are various possible ways you can scale it. So one is you can add more capacity in one location. For example, you can have a cluster in the cloud with load balancing, or you can add more DOH resolvers around the world and some form of load balancing in front of them. Or you could add a sort of a proxy in front of the DOH server that is in a lot of countries, like a CDN, and then fronting it, and then you can scale the HTTP TLS connection like you do your normal application. So that's the method we'll be looking at today. So this is how we will look at it. So in front of the DOH server, we'll have an edge server, which is a sort of a CDN server. And this server, of course, is very close to your mobile app client and it's all over the world in various ISP. So the DOH resolution flow is accelerated by the edge compute system and the edge database system. So this edge server will have a sort of small compute processor, as well as a sort of a database to store state and objects. So the edge database, we store the DOH resolution, we store the answers to whatever questions the mobile app client will need, and also you will store it together with the TTL values. So frequently, the edge server can be the same server where the web app is also getting all its other data after the DOH resolution. So after DOH resolution, you will get various data, the API, the static objects, the images, and frequently this can be the same server as well, which it's communicating with. So if we look closely into how the signal flow will look like. So first, you will have you need to get the closest edge server to where the app is. So this might still be a DO53 resolution. But once that is done, the app can then post all the questions for all the host name that it is going to use in the app, in the functioning of the app. So for example, you will need host names for your APIs, you will need host names for various third-party APIs you might be using, like Twilio or Stripe or anything. Host names for static objects, stores which you'll be downloading, or your images, or your JSON objects. Host name for beaconing. So a lot of apps today, they will send back beaconing to understand the state, to troubleshooting, for debugging purposes. So you need all that host names. So the app can then post those questions over DOH to the edge, which we found earlier. And then the edge, which has a compute and a database system built in, will first of all, the compute system will look at it, look in the database, and then see whether there are any answers in there. If there are answers in there, and then he will look at the TTL, and if it's expired, then he will go forward to the DOH server, which is in the cloud or in a specific customer data center. And then this will go off to resolve it the usual way. And then when the answer comes back, you will store it into the database together with the TTL and then return it to the edge, and the edge will return it to the application. If the answers is already there, then you just return it and then you'll get a very fast answer. The other thing is that because we have a compute system, we can also apply some business logic to these answers. So for example, you want to have TTL for different people in different regions. You can do that, or whatever business logic you can think of can be programmed within here. So not everybody might receive the same answer or TTL. And the other benefit is, of course, if your DOH resolver goes down, the answers are already at the edge all over the world that is near to the user. So it provides a resiliency as well to your DOH infrastructure. Yeah, and just to summarize that process flow, first resolve your DO53 to get the closest edge server, and then the response is returned and stored in the edge database together with the TTL value. It is also stored on the edge server's cache. On the next request, if the TTL has not expired, it will be served from cache. If it's not expired and the cache has been evicted, it will be served from the edge database. If the cache is expired, it can go forward to the DOH server and updates the edge database again. And I mentioned there's the resiliency benefits as well. So the benefits for this architecture is that you have a large performance improvement in going to the nearest edge, right? So let's say you have users all over the world. You don't have to go back to a centralized edge server. And the good thing is the deployment of this are frequently within the same ISP as well. So you get your answers very quickly. You can do horizontal scaling of TCP connection as well, right? So these are the servers that are also serving your data and everything. So you are anyway going to make that TCP connection, which you are going to use it for more purposes. And of course, it protects against DDoS because it's very distributed. It enables smart resolution. So I mentioned you could ask a question and you could have business logic. Let's say for different region, for different user agents, give back a different answer. And you have that robustness as well in case of failures in the DOH central server. And there are other benefits as well if you do it this way, right? So an app might use a lot of host names, like I mentioned just now, right? For static objects one, for images another one, and it might be using various in today's type of application. Normally people will use a lot of software as a service, like to do various things. Like use an SMS, they might use video, or to use beaconing. That they might use another service for collecting their log data and everything. So these host names in the usual case will be resolved as when they come to that part of the function. But now if you use DOH, you can upfront put all these questions in one query, in one request, and then get back all the answers also in one response. So, and you're also setting up the TCP, HTTP connection to be used for the various other functionality of the app after you get the DOH answers. You will need to do API calls to get your data, right? So the connection has already been set up. So it will also increase the performance of the app by getting all the answers at once, and also by setting up the connection for the subsequent HTTP requests. So the benefits are multifold for this type of infrastructure. And you might ask, yeah, is it common to have a client-side implementation for DOH? Yeah, I guess you could write your own HTTP client in it, but some of the common HTTP client, let's say OK HTTP, which is a common one which people use in Android today, they also have a DNS over HTTP, DNS object. So the answer is yes. It seems to be quite common now to have this sort of HTTP client which can use DOH built in to the application itself, which programmers can make use of and take and use it. And yeah, so we come to the summary. So we see that app providers are increasingly implementing DOH for security reasons and for privacy reasons. And some of them might not prefer not to use public resolvers, but set up their own DOH resolver so they can see their own data, mine their own data. But setting up performant DOH architecture can be difficult and might be costly and might not warrant investing in it, especially if you just for your own app, right? So using a edge compute and HDB architecture of let's say somebody who has a network already at the edge can enable you to make your DOH architecture more performant, and even that make your app even more performant, like I mentioned earlier, because of the multifold benefits of asking all the questions you need at once, and also setting up the TCP connection as well. And of course, you get the various security benefits as well. So yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions or any comments.
So Yin, we have a question from Jeff Houston. I'm actually just going to ask Jeff if he could ask his question directly.
Sure. Okay, I'll read it out. How would you expect a client to reconcile the issues that might arise when the application resolves a DNS query name and gets one answer, and a different application that might go through something other than Akamai but also uses DNS over HTTPS would actually get a different answer to the same question? And what if I then actually do it manually and actually just go through my operating system stack, the resolver's ISP, and get yet another different answer? How's the client meant to make sense of the fact that one name and one type get a whole bunch of different answers? How are you going to address that?
So the application itself is, I mean, you might not give this option to the user, right? So let's say I release an application, a UGC app or e-commerce app. This is already within my application on how to get the answers. I'm going to get the answers along this path. The user can't change it. It's not an option for the user, right? It's embedded deep down within my HTTP client on how to ask the questions already.
I think so. Let me say that application number one is Firefox, and application number two is the Chrome browser. Yeah. I put the same URL into each of them, and get back entirely different answers. What happens then?
Those are Chrome and Firefox, but the thing is that this is an application which the application provider control, right? So when I release this app, let's say in the App Store, this is my application. So I'm not Chrome or I'm not Firefox. I'm like say application, let's say e-commerce application like Shopee. Yeah. So I release this app and I control it. I don't let the user go and find a different way to ask the question, right? The app is controlled by me. I'm the release of the Shopee, right? I'm not this is not a browser app or anything. This is my own app, the application provider own app. And there's only one way for him to ask a question, which is to my DOH resolver. Does that make sense?
In that particular case, I think the crux of this though is the fact that, as Jeff is alluding to, the customer buys a service from their internet service provider. They're the ones they call when it doesn't work. They don't generally call the application provider to say, hey, my app's not working. They generally will go, hey, service provider, what's going on here? I can't access this tool. The service provider will go, can you drop to a command prompt and do an NS lookup or capture the records of what you're getting from your DNS so that we can start to evaluate where the problem might be. Does that?
I might debate that point, right? So let's say today I have an iPhone. If I find Google is working, Chrome is working, I find Shopee is not working, the likelihood of me calling, let's say my service provider, Singtel, is not so high. Shopee is not working and all the others is working. I would say, yeah, Shopee is not working. Let's call Shopee.
I think the point though is the fact that a lot of people on the internet though today are not potentially as skilled and understand that. So there's got to be a level of how do you give information to help diagnose the problem for when someone who doesn't know to reach out to you guys to say there's a problem. And that's, I think, part of the question here. Jeff, have I misunderstood?
Now, the assumption is a DNS name is a DNS name. And what you're doing here is actually allowing applications to resolve that name in an application-specific context. And this is what we typically call fragmentation. And so how would you ensure that that name always gets resolved consistently? Because that's what the user expects. And if you betray that expectation, as a developer, as an application designer, you're causing problems for everyone else who has to support confused users. And their normal courses of support in the help desks and so on have no idea how to resolve this problem. Not even turning it off and turning it on again is going to help. And so, in some ways, in deploying this wonderful new technology of how to hide DNS queries in applications from all the rest of the DNS infrastructure might be a wonderful thing in the name of security. The issue is if you don't do it thoughtfully, you take the risk of actually pulling the DNS apart and causing problems not just for Akamai and Akamai customers, but for everybody everywhere. Because once you start contradicting our assumptions about the internet and creating behaviors that aren't predictable, in a naive sense, then everyone has to help out confused users again. And that's the kind of issue that we're facing here. And yes, I think I picked on you because it was just a convenient point to actually highlight this issue, that once you start going down this path of DNS over HTTPS, be very careful, because the downsides of this are phenomenally high. And if all of this is to get a fast DNS, then the cost is a DNS that's no longer consistent, and that's too high a price to pay. And that's the trade-off as engineers, I think, we're looking squarely at. And I don't think we have clear answers at this point.
Yeah, I get your point. Just that this is actually, this is not like this is done by the application provider itself, right? Not even at our Akamai level. The application provider themselves is going to make this app and set up their own DOH infrastructure. So they will do what is necessary to make sure the user doesn't get different answers, right? So at this point, when the app itself requests the various host name that is going to be used in this app, let's say images.example.com beaconing.example.com, there's only one path that the app will give him, right? I mean, let's say you don't have, why would the app let the user ask a public DNS, DOH resolver? No, it's already.
If I was designing a botnet with a DNS-based command and control facility, which typically is taken down by disrupting the DNS and subverting it, the first thing I would turn to is DNS over HTTPS to make sure my botnet is undiscoverable and untamperable with. And I would be an even bigger problem tomorrow than I am today. You know, there's upsides and downsides all over the place in this area. And I don't think we can simply say it's not a problem, it's all going to be fine.
Okay.
You know, that's not the case.
I get it. Okay, yeah. This technology also used in botnet.
Sure.
And I think the other thing that we'll just mention here is we have one more question that's come in on the chat window, Yin.
Let me look at it.
The DNS over HTTP is very secure for clients and customers. So if it's already using DNS over HTTP on the PC mobile, how do they know they are secure on the internet with DOH? How can they check it?
They know they are secure on the internet with DOH. I guess the normal user won't be able to tell, right? Under the covers, how an app works, whether it's using the underlying OS resolver or within the application layer itself. So if I understood correctly, you're asking how can a normal user understand how this app is functioning? I think they won't. It's not easy. I mean, unless you can go to and monitor the you put a man in the middle, or you put some sort of instrumentation on your PC to monitor just the app behaviors and the calls it's making. Otherwise, it would be hard to see under the hood what this app is doing. But of course, there are ways to do it. You could put some instrumentation like Frida or what and see what it's doing, or you put a man in the middle and see what it's doing, and it doesn't make any UDP 53 calls. Then you can see he's making DNS over HTTP calls. Then you know what he's doing.
Fair enough.
Does that answer your question?
Trin, try, if that answers your question, could you just let us know in the chat window? But otherwise, we are out of time. So with that, I will say thank you very much to our speakers. Once again, to Jeff, Dwayne, and Yin, and for definitely promoting an interesting conversation at the end. That's been very useful. And I'm sure we could probably talk for hours if we were all face-to-face further on this. But unfortunately, today we're all virtual, but hopefully the next time we have an APRICOT, we'll be face-to-face, and we can definitely dig into that a lot further. And with that, thank you very much to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Over to you, Phil.
All right. Thank you very much, Warwick. I was just about to say, keep going, because this is fascinating, but then it would really eat into our break time that we have here. So what a great session. Thank you so much. Thank you to the speakers, Yin, Dwayne, and Jeff. It was great to see so many questions and so much discussion at the end as well. So Warwick, thank you for shepherding that session. Really appreciate it as always.
No worries.
And with that, now it's time for our midday break, or at least midday in some part of the world. Here it's mid-afternoon in Brisbane. So we have about a 40-minute break before we resume with the next session. The next session is all about security operations. So we're back to security theme, or carry on with our security theme, I should say. So please join us in about 40 minutes time. It will be a brand new Zoom session. So this one will terminate once we play some of the outro slides, and enjoy your break. And we will see you back in about 20 minutes. Sorry, 40 minutes. Many thanks, everyone.
you.